We are at the Meuse-Argonne Cemetery, American Cemetery right now. And you can see how well maintained this cemetery is.
American Cemetery, America's largest cemetery in Europe, and a lot of people are surprised by that because they always think about Normandy, and that's our third largest in Europe, actually, fourth largest in the world. The only cemetery we have overseas larger than this one is in Manila. Here we have 14,000 plus buried, plus almost 1,000 on the wall of the missing, which are the loggia of the chapel up there. In Manila you'll find 17,000 buried and 36,000 on their wall of the missing. So this is one of our cemeteries in France, one of the original cemeteries when we came here about 100 years ago. And a lot of fighting took place here. This was the last 47 days of the war, the Meuse-Argonne campaign. I won't go into that because you have people here who will do that for you. But I will let you know you are standing on what was once the front line for the 5th Infantry Division. Right here to the top of this hill behind us. And when the 5th Infantry Division was considered exhausted, the 90th Infantry Division came over and took the fight further on. As I had mentioned, it's the last 47 days of the war. The goal of this campaign was to get to the city of Sedan, or we'd say Sedan, and not so much the city itself. That was reserved for the French army, for the most part. A little controversy with that one. But the American army, we were trying to push the Germans back and get them across the Meuse River to continue the war up toward Belgium. And the main objective, though, was to cut the rail lines the Germans had going from southeast to northwest. Anytime they had an attack up in the Somme or any place up there, we would attack at one place only and hold the line the rest of the places. The Germans used these rail lines to transport their men and equipment. Stop that attack, we would attack somewhere else. They would use those rail lines to reinforce there. So finally, in 1918, the Allies decided, Marshal Foch takes the credit, even though it wasn't his idea. They decided we will attack all the way from the North Sea down to the Meuse River. Everybody. That way the Germans can't move their troops back and forth, and they have to fight us. Our job, though, was to push them back behind the Meuse River, cut those rail lines so they can't reinforce anymore, and then keep pushing them off toward Belgium. And by the time they got to the Meuse River, almost into the city of Sedan, they did not cut those rail lines. We had the armistice on 11 November. This is America's largest battle. You think of places like Iwo Jima and Okinawa and Normandy. This is still America's largest battle. On about a 40-kilometer wide front, and you're going to look at the map over there, you'll see it, you had roughly 1.2 million young Americans. And an American expeditionary force still learning how to fight a modern war. And when you're learning how to fight a modern war, the problem with that is you incur a lot of casualties in the process of learning these lessons. And in this 47-day campaign, we had over 95,000 young Americans wounded, many of them out of battle. And we had over 26,000 killed. So while they're fighting in the middle of October on this hill over here, imagine you're a young soldier in your hole or whatever you're hiding in over here, and you peer back on the 14th of October, what's going on that ground we just took over there? They were creating a cemetery. Yep, you know, what does that do to your psyche? Gee, the buddies I lost yesterday are now being put over there. Will I be there tonight or tomorrow? Because you know tomorrow morning at 5:30, you're going to be told, get out of your hole and go forward again under artillery and machine gun fire. And if you look at the countryside as you travel around here, what a great place for defense. All these little copses of woods here and there, these big open fields that these young Americans had to cross with their head down. All right. So it was a very important time for the American Army. So we created this cemetery over here, mid-October 1918. By the time the war was over, we had cemeteries everywhere, all around the area, because you don't have transport to bring the soldiers to one place, because you're too busy getting equipment, supplies, ammunition, medical help, and hopefully some food on these small roads. So today they're nice, they're asphalt. Back then they were just mud, and your vehicles weren't that great. So you had a lot of problems with logistics. So you're not able to bring the soldiers all back to one place. So we had cemeteries all over the battlefield. After the war, these were all consolidated into one cemetery across this field over here. And in 1920-21, we had over 25,000 Americans buried over here. In 1921, they were all disinterred and prepared for repatriation back home. The same time, the War Department contacted all the families that they could. A little difficult back then. I'm sure the internet was quite slow. Okay, to find a family out in the middle of Montana. But they all had the choice. You can have your soldier brought home to a national cemetery or your hometown cemetery at government expense, or buried overseas. Roughly 60% went home. So of those 25,000 plus that were here, and we consolidated some other cemeteries after that, today we have 14,246 buried over here. Any questions? 1939. Okay, essentially. In 1940, the Germans came through and took over, a good chunk of France. So what happened to our cemeteries? Well, nothing. The superintendent stayed here. But in 1941, we declared war on Germany after Japan. So now we're at war. All of our superintendents were evacuated and taken out. And some of the grounds crew stayed here to maintain the area. Of course, not like it normally would be, but they did their best. But what happened on site here? We know the Germans were here, but they did not bother the soldiers over there. No vandalism, nothing, because they are professional soldiers as well, and they understand. However, they did ransack both houses and this building. It didn't look like this back then. In this building and some of the service area in the back where we keep all the equipment. Okay, they did ransack that, and that's my house over there. So, if anybody wants a job, that house is empty.
You got a pretty good size memorial.
Our soldiers and Marines there that died of wounds, but mostly they're behind the lines burial, zone of the interior. But the fight kind of starts in the Somme, Cantigny, a regiment of the 1st Division. Then they have divisions that fought under the British, but really that's a regimental fight. Then they go to, that's in May. In June they go to Aisne-Marne, which is the 2nd and 3rd Divisions, parts of the 28th. This AO here is the 2nd biggest fight, 2nd biggest cemetery, but maybe because Americans can't pronounce the words, or there's just a 40-mile battle space from Chateau-Thierry to Fiume and then north. This is 2 campaigns. So if you look at that World War I victory medal in the Hill 204, it's got the battle class. The Aisne is stopping the Germans at the Marne. Pushing them back up through the Salient is the Aisne-Marne offensive to the Vel River. And then at the Vel on the other side is the Oise campaign. So there were 10 divisions that fought here, over 40 miles, but this is the first time an American corps, I Corps, controlled American divisions. Then they go to Saint Mihiel, you have a field army. They go to Meuse-Argonne, they got 2 field armies. So every cemetery gets bigger and bigger, more American control, and half our dead are at the Meuse-Argonne, 26,000 in 6 weeks. So if you can imagine 600 to 800 dead a day for 6 weeks and putting that on CNN, that's how big the Meuse-Argonne is. This AO here, maybe you saw La Croix Rouge Farm Monument, but if you're in Belleau, the 2nd Division stopped up there behind the chapel and were relieved by 26th Division, New England National Guard. They have a church across the road, the 26th Division Church, the name of every dead on the interior walls. And then they fought up about 7 kilometers from here to the Croix Rouge Farm, where the Rainbow Division took their place. They fought just behind our monument where the 4th Division took their place. So from 7 kilometers away from here at La Croix Rouge Farm to the woods behind the memorial, they had 1,200 dead. from the 26th of July to the 2nd of August. So I don't know if they even teach frontages anymore, but if I try to think, I think a NATO division, Steve might know, in the offense is probably 15 kilometers of frontage.
Yep.
If you look at Ferentardenoise, I think it's 2.5 clicks that way, and the ridge line there that separates us from Sergy is 4 kilometers. They had 3 regiments on line in this space, fighting like this. So you have to study the day by days, but basically the Ohio guys were next to Ferentardenoise, the New York guys were here, then the Alabama guys, and on the other side of that ridge line where my great uncle was gassed, MG Company 168. So just in that little battle space, you know, this was, people come here and say, oh, I thought there was trenches like, you know, all quiet on the Western Front. You see these open fields. There's a Medal of Honor recipient right behind my house on that ridge line, Richard O'Neill. That ridge line there is probably 2 kilometers from the monument, and the Germans attacked on the 27th of May. They took this ground, including Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler was in Ferentardenoise. He fought the 3rd Division at Mezzi. They occupied this ground for 2 months. When they couldn't cross the Marne and retreated, all these were delaying actions along rivers, because you'd have to fight across the river to get to the other side. So they were buying time to prepare the defenses up at the Vel River. So they had massed 08 Maxims in those trees up there, 2 months to get ready. They dialed in the elevate on the T&E. They had massed machine gun overhead fire where they didn't even see those Americans. But on the other side, they were laid out like, you know, arrows. They were just getting shot in overhead fire, beaten zones, cones of fire. So we are really on a battlefield. Soldiers were buried across the road the 1st of August 1918. About 2 months ago, I found pictures of African American soldiers with stretchers searching the Vel River in the 28th Division sector for dead. And then it shows them burying them here across the road. You can see the farm field. I'm an Iowa farm boy, so I relate to all these people out here. He was over there with a John Deere and a disc. And I went over there and talked to him. He's a hired hand for the son of the old mayor. I said, look, here's what this looked like in 1918. They were burying people here December 1918. He said, I just turned over a VB grenade on the other side before the woods. I said, you ever find anything else? He said, last year that creek that runs through there fell over, and we saw in the bank almost 40 German helmets in a row. When we touched them, they started to fall apart except for that metal rim. I said, I wonder what that was. He said, well, I mean, this is in French. He says, I think when the 42nd took Sergy, they went to Nell and they took prisoners. They said, okay, you know, hands up, cartridge belts, Mausers, helmets. They stacked up their helmets and then they buried all that stuff. When the creek fell away, voila. So you'll find 77, 75s. We went to Hill 212. You can't search with a metal detector unless you know the owner, but one of my crew is related to him. So they said, where should we search? They had 2 metal detectors. So just like all of us, we say, okay, where would you make the final coordination line? You know, full magazine, you could see a lip up at the top. Where would the corpsman drag the guys, you know, plasma, triage the guys? And we found 4, not Mills grenade, what's the French grenade?
All the limits? Or
Yeah,
the F1s?
4 of them, and they had been in soil where all we had to do was wire brush and they looked like they came out of a museum.
Oh my God.
Because there's so many munitions here, almost everybody was in the French army. 1918 there were 40 million French, but they had 1.5 million dead. They had 3.5 million wounded. So no matter how you do the math, I was thrown out of high school, but I mean, if you have 20 million men, they're not all military age. So if it's 15 million, that means 1 out of 3 were killed or wounded. If it's 10 million, every other guy. So every French farmer had experience with munitions. So you can go from Coutray, the 1st Division sector, that Son-Amon's farm, all the places. If you go up by their barn, you'll see them. 77 rounds, they still pull them over. We're up on Hill 288 by Côte de Chantalon. I'm from Iowa, so I was interested where the 168 was before the 2 farms. And I was looking at the trenches. And right at the base of a tree, there was an odd 6 clip of 5 rounds. And when you went like this, there were 6 of them. They're in my garage now. Rock Island Armory, I think, 1917. But you could see that this guy had used the tree to make his fighting position. He had his ready ammo here to put in the charger clips, and like Marines, you know, 0 dark 30, let's go, and he left it. We found 2 charger clips under a mess kit lid in Bois-Coulis about 2 months ago where Joyce Kilmer was killed. You could tell he put the mess kit lid on top to keep the ammo dry, and then he left. So we are really and truly on a battlefield. But I don't have a General Patton. I don't have a Medal of Honor recipient. Some people go to Luxembourg to see him. Some people go to Normandy, and that's okay. Of the 2,300 barrels in Bellow, about 300 are Marines. But Bellow Wood just comes with the Marine Corps. I was a Marine over 30 years, so I understand it. I don't resent it. I love it. But here, I have 6,000 dead Americans who bought this little piece of France. And if you were in Somalia and Afghanistan, Iraq, we don't get plaques. We just get shot at like these guys. So I love this cemetery. I love this cemetery. It looks very military. There's 6,012 burials, so it's almost 1,500 in each of the 4 squares. If you go in the chapel, there's 241 missing, all missing north of the Vel, the Wazane offensive, 28th, 93rd, 77th Division. We have a little bit of everybody because of the 110, 120,000 dead Americans, more than 60,000 died of flu. And they almost died there in Smedley Butler's embarkation camp in western France. So you have huge cemeteries in Bray-Saint-Nazaire. And in 1922, when the families made the decision, should we repatriate or should we have them buried in France, our cemetery is on battlefields. So probably 30% of my dead here, maybe 35%, were buried from western France. They weren't killed here. But at the end of the war, Armistice Day, there were less than 1,000 burials here. There were basically 2 divisions you can see on the map inside that articulates the Aisne-Marne offensive. Basically from the Marne River, there were 2 divisions side by side. First the 26th and the 3rd, then the 28th and the 42nd, all the way up to the Vel River. And there were cemeteries everywhere. You can follow the monuments. 26th Division Church, the La Croix-Rouge Farm for the 42nd, up on the National Highway, the 4th. Over here, the Grimpet Woods, 32nd Division. The 77th, I don't think, has one. But all around here, the Kenton Roosevelt Monument. There are many private monuments here. The 2nd Division Boulders, maybe you just saw those.
Yep.
You can look at the old pictures of that National Highway there by Leverpoy Farm. That was basically the dividing line between 1-5 and 2-5. 3-5 was in reserve. And then if you go into the woods on the 1-5 side, they had 2 up and 2 back, 4 letter companies. So you know there's a break in the woods before that Translawn Farm. I don't exactly know where Chukla and Kojic is the other one.
Yeah.
Got their Medal of Honors, bayonet and Maxim gunners. But you know when you're in the woods or looking at the woods from Translawn Farm, they were on the right or on the left, somewhere in that woods. And when you go through there, you'll see OT-6 brass, 8mm brass. So you're in a wonderful part of France, hard-earned by Americans. There was, I do an AP interview. I had 4 family members here today. One was killed in the 165th, 42nd Division, 28 July. One was killed in the 112th, 28th Division in September. One just left, a Staff Sergeant Marine with the Air Force Captain wife. They're in South Dakota. He was killed in 7th Artillery, 1st Division, 20 July. And the other one was in the 32nd Division in one day, which is notable here. Our cemetery, we don't have a train. You have to get a taxi from Chateau Thierry, and this is not a D road. D road's a department road where you say, hey, what's that? I mean, you have to plan, you have to come here. So there's all that business of, freedom fries, and we like to say our relationship with France is like a marriage. Some days we have a fight, but we were friends before, we're friends now, we're always going to be friends. Because my visitors are French. When I do Memorial Day, my guest speaker is a 2-star general shot down in a Harrier captured by the Iraqis, and I have a 4 Harrier flyover. But it's going to be mostly looked at by French people. And it's a work day. They're going to take a day off to come here. In my crew, I have 2 guys whose dads work here to retirement. They're all farm boys. If you're on this side of the Marne, they farm sugar beets and winter and summer wheat. If you're on that side, they pick grapes for champagne. It's like I grew up in Iowa. This town up here, Sarange, is 200 people. Don't even have an ATM. It's Sarange a now, because that's only 50 buildings. but their mayor runs a gas station in Ferentardouan. In my town of 200 people, our mayor ran, you know, the garage. So I can relate to the small town legion, the Anshik Combatant, and if you're, you know, kind of the ugly American, you're not going to get anywhere. But if you go to the monuments for their deaths in the campaigns in North Africa, you go to the cemetery on the back side, you'll see French and German army. If you go to the French side, they're white French crosses with ovals for the Muslims, who were the Algerians, the Senegalese, the Moroccans in the trailer regiments. So if you ask my crew, I was here 2 weeks, and because my great uncle was gassed over there. My uncle was in 20 Corps. Third Army built the bridge in Damery when the Germans blew it up, August 44. So I'm the third generation, and my crew lives in that town. So if you can operate in that environment, my job really, I worked in 5 cemeteries. In Normandy, you're going to do a lot of tourism. Here, you're going to do a lot of horticulture. So if you can run a blue-collar workforce, what Sergeant Major can't, who can't do a police call in another language, you know, you get a lot of satisfaction from this job. Some engineering, we're a separate agency in the executive branch, only 36 of us in our cemeteries, 400 employees. So we really feel privileged to have this job and tell the story of these men. BBC, when they did their interview, they asked me if this war was important to Americans. He was from Wales, so he spoke French kind of funny, and he had a pretty French girl with him. I think he was being chesty for. So he was supposed to interview at Inmar, and he wasn't there, so he stood up for me. He didn't have a film permit. Normally with media, you say, what do you want to know, where you going? You kind of research their questions. So he showed up. I said, okay, pal, what do you want to do? He said, take me to your best-known grave, which is Joyce Kilmer.
Where is that?
Joyce Kilmer is a poet.
No, I say, where is it? I know
It's right
very
across
well.
the road.
Oh, yeah. Over here?
Yeah, so I'll take you there. There's Oliver Ames, who was heir to the Ames Tool Company, is on this side. He was Donovan's adjutant, killed at Bois-Coulis at my neighbor's farm there. When he was killed, Kilmer took his place, and then he was killed. So they're buried not far apart. But this guy said, do you think the war is important? He said, you know, to a European, you guys thought the war was small, and at the end, what say? There on the back of my neck. And I said, I think you ought to read more books. You know, at the end of the war, there were more Americans in France than the British. You know, we were pumping up for 1918. And he says, well, if I go in the library, I see a lot of books on World War II, not very many on World War I. I said, well, if you go in a French library, you'll see a lot of books on World War I and not very many on World War II. You should go to a different library. So he was very combative, and I couldn't figure out why. And so I, you know, at some point, I forgot what question, I had had enough. And I said, you know, when we built our country, and you guys were taxing us, we got tired of it. We killed guys like you. We killed American Indians. We killed people down in Cuba. We killed people out in the Philippines to make our country. But when Americans came here, we fought for France. It made us who we are. We became a better people and made ourselves a better country. That's who we are. We fight for people who can't fight for themselves. We're the good guys. Yeah, it's important. What say? So that's how I feel about it. I'm very proud to take care of these Americans. I think they said, what's the big deal? I mean, I have to work with French media, and if you say, what's important about World War I? Put us on the world stage, now we're a world power. You know, they don't like that. That's arrogant. But if you tell them, you know, after we started out with 200,000 guys under arms, 18 months later we had 4 million. 2 million in France, 1 million in the last battle. And we would have had a lot of those 4 million in France for 1919 when they signed the armistice. So the diplomatic way to say it is after 4 years of warfare in trenches from the Channel to Switzerland, we carved out our own sector. We made our own ports. We brought logging companies from Washington and Oregon. We built our own railroads. We had our own training areas and our own sector. So we were the I don't know, the significant factor at the end of the war. These guys probably would have fought. Who would have won? I don't know. They probably would have signed an armistice. The Germans could, you know how scientific Germans are, they could be in Brest and do, you know, make tick marks. We had 300,000, 350,000 guys a month showing up here. So they knew that we were going to be a significant factor. So they made the peace offensives. This here was the last one, from the Shemendy Dam, you know, down to Chateau Thierry. And after this cul-de-sac was pushed back, they never made another offensive. The one before this was there by Rams, the swept close to Saint-Pie. So after this was halted, the Germans never again took the offensive. So our part of the war was very important. Don't let them tell you any different. So these are really places of honor. It makes us proud to be Americans and proud to tell their story. And I'm proud you took the time to come here, because the magnet is bellow. I don't resent it. I understand it. He probably topped 20,000 last year. I'm closer to 7. On the day of the ceremony, they're expecting up to 7,000. I'm guessing 1,000, which is okay. And most of mine will be French. I'll have parts of the 1st Infantry Division, Marines from Europe, and French Army here. So we'll have a wonderful ceremony, but it's more like a community ceremony. I know people from these towns. For my 100th, there are 10 divisions that fought here. I picked out a DSC recipient from each of them. I have their grave marked. We're going to read their citation behind a bayoneted Springfield rifle and a helmet. Say their name 3 times, read their DSC. They can look at the map and know that that guy was killed in Epierre or Coulonge or Bouvard, where these mayors come from. So I want to have an interpretive ceremony, because French people know that Americans were killed here. But their war was such a traumatic event, they don't really pay attention to what we did. They don't really know. But to be honest, if you ask an American school kid, they probably don't know either. But you have to remember, in 1918, if you go up to the caves on Shemendy Dam, you know, those were limestone caves. The Germans attacked and took them over. Then the French attacked and took them over. And in March 1918, Americans in the 26th Division went down there. Then when they attacked, the Germans got in there again. So people started cutting the carvings off the wall. They had to put a lock on it. So if you know the right guy and give him a bottle of wine, you can go about 50 meters in the ground. And if you think of our textbook in 1918, what would an American draw 100 years ago? What does their graffiti look like? You know, because you can see German, you can see French, you can see American writing. They all wrote names of buddies that were killed. They took like the wax off an 81 round or whatever they had, started it on fire and wrote things. Americans made a lot of faces of horses. They just got cars. They have a lot of pictures of the Maine blowing up. They have a lot of pictures of George Washington cutting the tree down with a hatchet. Who remembers that story? But our textbooks were only that thick, and they drew a lot of pictures of Lafayette. So my takeaway was, because some of the guys' names in them caves are buried in Belleau Wood. They were killed up there, Guivray, Hill 193, on the way up here. It's very informative to see their mindset. Their dad, the grandfather, was in the Civil War. They learned about the French helping us, and they wanted to help France. The significance of Kilmer and Ames, you know Ames Tool Company. They started about the Revolutionary War. And if you look at those T-handle E-tools from 1918, Ames Tool Company. If you look at the World War II folding top without the pickaxe, Ames Tool Company. I have one in there. Ames descendant came here, left his medals from Vietnam. He said, my whole tour in Nam, I never told anybody we made them A-tools because we hate to dig. I have one from 1966 that says Ames Tool Company. I show on the tours. And if you look at the black one, now we have 3 pieces, Ames Tool Company. This guy was heir to $1 million business. He didn't have to go in the Army, but he wanted to fight. Kilmer was in his 30s, grown kids. Everybody in the country knew him. He didn't have to be in the Army, but he wanted to fight, you know. My great uncle, when they fought up to Hill 212, they couldn't advance. They took the crest, but they couldn't get to the top because the 32nd Division had advanced past Sierres. They were shooting, so they brought up my great uncle's machine gun company, those Hotchkiss guns, to decimate the Germans as they came across. When they went through Sergy, they had one squad of guns take a 77 round, killed 4 of them. One of them's buried here. He was killed a week after his 18th birthday. Because we're Iowa farmers. What would you rather do, make gloves or go to France? They wanted to help the French people. He's from Guthrie Center, Iowa, Omar Shear. You know, I go to his grave every day. You know, my great uncle started going to the VA in 1919. It basically ate his esophagus, caused stomach problems, chronic diarrhea. Then it ate his lungs. It took 40 years to kill him. but I have his journal, and he describes being in a gas mask from midnight till 7 in the morning, and he describes the cloud of gas going toward him. So if you picture those World War I uniforms that are wool, who'd want to sleep in that rig? How can you get gas out of a wool uniform? They were all gassed. My cousin Bob died last year. He was in the 101 in the Ashau, Hamburger Hill, Ripcord. He died in 2016, Agent Orange. It took 40 years to kill him, just like my great uncle. But me, I turned 65 in January. So no matter how many shots, how many pills, I'm in my golden years already. So I cheated the odds, and I hope they're in my favor.
Just getting started.
Just get it started. So the real learning experience, you're welcome to, probably with your level of experience, you can look at a headstone. They're down to regimental level. You know the order of battle, you know the date, you can tell where they were killed. We have 4 sets of brothers that are buried beside each other. We have 3 other brothers whose brother's somewhere else in the cemetery. We have 4 other brothers who have a brother buried somewhere else in France. In the 32nd Division had a lot of Indians from Michigan and Wisconsin. There were 2 sons and the father in one rifle company. Wow. They watched their father disappear. 77, hardly any remains in that casket. So sometimes I've probably seen 60 caskets open up. Sometimes they're there, sometimes there's some fragments. In 1977, one of the sons came here to his grave and smoked a peace pipe. We have a picture of him there. There's a set of brothers here, Knight. The third Knight that wasn't killed is the original guy who wrote the story of Lassie. Mary Moore made 12 silent movies in Hollywood, but she didn't want to stay in Hollywood. She came here to France and died of flu, working for the YMCA. We have an unknown French soldier here, the 156 Regiment of Infantry. If you look at the maps, that regiment was just beside the rainbow going up by Le Charmel. So I don't know why he's here. The only paper I could find was from 1965. He must have had the regimental insignia because it has the regiment on his grave. I went through some researchers. They have 3 missing in action. So just like in the States, if you don't have a congressman, if you don't have a senator, you don't have no juice. So the sous-prefet of Soissons is very interested in history. I said, here's the 3 MIA. It's probably 10,000 euro to bring this guy up, do the cuts, ID. If you go to those families, get the DNA. If you bring that casket up, you have a very good chance to ID this guy. You know, I just need to find the right guy. So all our cemeteries have these anomalies that don't fit like Steve. There are 51 sailors here. I'm a Marine. I want to know the stories of the corpsmen. I couldn't find a corpsman. There's 2 chief pharmacists made here. He said, Gates has the Navy Cross. I said, it ain't on his headstone. He said, here's the citation. This guy, Horatio Gates, is the one corpsman with the Marines. And if you were a Marine that wanted to go on liberty with a corpsman, this is the guy. 3 enlistments. He's from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. 18 years old, he wants to join the Navy. His father says no. Tries to get congressmen to stop him, but he's 18. He goes in the Navy for a year. Buys his discharge. 1913, he decides to miss the Navy. Where did they send him? Yokosuka, Japan. Geisha girl tattoo. They sent him to Shanghai. Crossed anchor. They sent him to Olongapo. Doves. He's a fleet sailor because I have his service record, all 3 of them, and I have his physical with these tattoos. He gets discharged in 1960. 1917, the war starts. He goes to the recruiter. He says, I want to go back in the Navy. They say, you're too old. He writes the same congressman that his father wrote to keep him out of the Navy. Where do they send him? Quantico, Virginia, base dispensary. This ain't what I came to the Navy for. We have 1 picture of him, a campaign cover, Eagle, Globe, and Anchor. He goes in the 3rd Replacement Battalion, and on the 22nd, 23rd of June, he goes to 6 Marines. He's still part of the Replacement Battalion, but he survives the woods. He goes to those beet fields you just saw, and if they tell you the story, once the 6 Marines cross that LOD, there are Germans throwing potato mashers down at the Marines on the deck, direct fire 77s. He probably has the fire plan sketch for all those MGs over there by Cates's trench. They're just shellacked. They're just, shellacked. He's out there in that open field doing traumatic amputations with Boy Scout knife, in the open. He gets the Navy Cross. He gets mentioned in dispatches, which becomes the Silver Star. He gets the French Croix de Guerre. He goes to San Miguel and survives, and then his appendix pops. So they transfer him to the 5th Naval Hospital or General Hospital, It's a fifth something hospital in Brest where he expires. So when Private Cloud looks up his name, what's the story on this guy? Burst appendix in Brest, assigned to fifth hospital. Next. If it wouldn't be for Steve, I wouldn't know this guy's story. So I'm very proud to tell his story. Anybody that comes here with any interest in the Navy, it's right to Horatio Gates, like the turncoat. Horatio Gates from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. You probably heard the story, or will hear the story of the dentist with the Medal of Honor and Bella Wood. Osborne.
Yep.
He was a dentist. They left his dental gear on the docks at Quantico. He gets to France. What do we do with this guy? Send him to BAS. So now he's in 6 Marines. When 96 Company starts down that hill toward Baresh, here's Captain Duncan, 45, Kane, follow me, Maxim. So Osborne goes to help him, and so does the First Sergeant. First Sergeant Sizzler, who enlisted in 1914 under a different name. When he makes First Sergeant, he changes his name back to Sizzler. He helps the dentist pull Captain Duncan into trees. You can go exactly where they were killed, the trees at the top of that hill. I've posted the 3 of them. But they were all killed by the 77. Captain Duncan, Navy Cross, DSC, Arlington. Osborne, Medal of Honor, Bella Wood. First Sergeant Sizzler, 1926, wild pigs dig him up. One of the ways he was identified was 14 Marine Corps keys on his body. So you can just picture this old sea dog. Bring your sea bags up here, Marines. Give me one of your keys. That's how they ID'd him. He's buried here in 1926 because Ain Marne was closed to burial. If you read I Will Hold, you read about a private from South Dakota that's blown apart in that field. He's also buried here. So I have 117 Marines in 6,012. So if you're when I was evicted from high school, I was 17 years old and tried to join the U.S. Army. I knew every shoulder patch, but the recruiter told my mother, if he's a bird here, he'll be a bird in the Army. He'll be back home in 6 months with bad paper. Make him go back to school when he's 18. He can make up his own mind. So when I was 18, I was smarter. I went in the Marine Corps, but I'm the Army's biggest fan. By the time I retired, I saw everybody bleed but the Coast Guard. So I'm I can talk just as much about the Army as I can the Marine Corps. I'm proud of everybody that's here. We have 28 aviators here. The 94th Aero Squadron Commander was the first airman shot down in World War I. Roosevelt got to the squadron after he was killed, but he's killed. Who knows who Iron Michael Daniel is? He was Audie Murphy's division commander, the 3rd Division. Yep. When they started helping the French in Vietnam, 1954, he was like the first Westmoreland or all those guys that went there. His brother is buried here, which a lot of people don't know. So if you thought you wouldn't learn anything from me,
I still learn it.
Steve.
I still learn it.
Say more about Roosevelt.
Say more about Roosevelt. The Roosevelt Descendants come here all the time. Yes. So there are the ones with the Roosevelt name, and then there's the ones with the Denby name. The Denbys are the ones that come here most often. They'll be here on Memorial Day. Who's the big guy? Richard Rubin. You heard that name from the books. He wrote The Last Doughboy and a couple other bestsellers. He had the New York Times pictorials.
Oh, Time Travelers thing.
Yeah, he wrote some wonderful stuff. Now, I don't know if this is a sea story. This is what he told me. Kenton Roosevelt should have never flown. He had bad eyes. Right. And, he was killed on Bastille Day, 14 July, just before the Germans made their peace offensive by Iran. So they escorted bombers on the way back. They got in a dogfight, scattered everywhere, and then they reassembled. So what Rubin told me was they believe that he saw planes, he lifted up, looked around, and they were German planes because he couldn't see very well, went down. True or not, I don't know, but it's interesting. When I got here, I looked in every nook and cranny for stuff that's interesting, and I found a huge plaque. It said, American Legion Post 1, Kenton Roosevelt, St. Louis, Missouri. And I thought, why would the Roosevelts be in Missouri? I said, who knows anything about this plaque? I had guys that have been working here since the 80s, and that plaque has been in that closet since the 80s. So I went to Chateau Thierry on the 2nd floor where the Kenton Roosevelt stuff is, and I saw a drawing of that plaque. It was a drawing of a drawing that's in Long Island. So I thought, the Roosevelts have a drawing, Chateau Thierry has a drawing, I have the plaque. I should put it somewhere. So I asked my agency if I could put it in the new interpretive center. They said, we have all the exhibits planned. I said, well, how about if I sign it over to the city? Well, over time, an MOU, they think it's theirs. I said, well, how about if I give it to them? Oh, that would be good. So we had a big ceremony. When you go in there, you're going to see a life-size picture of Kenton Roosevelt beside his aircraft. And up on top of it is a big bronze plaque. So when the Roosevelts were here about a month ago, I said, tell me more about this plaque. I don't know why it's here. I don't know why. He says, this is the first American Legion post in the United States. And St. Louis asked the Roosevelts if they could name it after him. So they had a series of letters where the American Legion asked our agency, can we put that plaque where he's buried? Because he was buried there till the 50s. And then they exhumed him and moved him to Normandy beside his brother. So my agency said that land is French. You have to ask the French. The French said it's fine in 1926. The American Legion came back in a big group and they dedicated that plaque out there. So they have 1927 pictures of that plaque being placed there by veterans of the Great War. And I don't know when they brought it here, maybe 1928. For my 100th ceremony, we do the 4 Harrier flyover. I just flew, it's kind of like doing a TAC. A significant part of the AEF. It was under American Corps control, 300,000 doughboys, 60,000 casualties from the 18th of July to the beginning of September. So I'm glad you took the time to come here. I'm sure it'll add to your experiences and make your research, you know, more satisfying. Okay?
I want a picture with Kate's cross, because what we did.
Yeah, with the brother general working. Wow.
Don't worry, Bert, I got you.
Let's try to keep it off the ground mostly. Where you at? This one, okay. How come you were there with my sergeant major?
I joined on a 2-year enlistment.
You got the bonus plan.
But where did they send me? Marine Barracks, Subic Bay. I thought 20 years of this should be pretty good. But I didn't see. I did a tour in London, which was pretty good.
Yeah, London's terrific.
Like I said, I was so envious of those fleet Marines coming through the gate on them amphibs. I said, I want to be a real Marine. I had almost 6 years at sea on amphibs when I was good.
I was running the last season on like we put that shortly after.
Yes, yeah. Gunny Babs would be bending trust to me if I see some red.
Oh, yeah. Very red.
Used to pull that big Filipino.
I told you, very red.
Well, let's see. I'd say we did pretty good.
Look up.
Yeah, we have to look pretty hard for that.
There you
We'll
go.
put our finger there.
Colonel, look up here.
Here, let's hold it. Who would have guessed? Who would have guessed?
What are you trying to process? Some crosses are different, bigger. Okay. 9:30 we have to be in the bus. So thank you.
This is the St. Mahill American Cemetery. Hello.
Really, really.
All these trees you see around us, they did not exist. You would have been able to see into the town of Teapor over on the other ridge, and you would be able to look at the top of Mont Sec, which is that hill out there. And at the same time, you would have seen Mont Sec completely covered in smoke, gas, and high explosives artillery shells. They continuously, the whole time, were firing at that. So you would have been able to slowly watch that artillery come across that hill and come down that hill. That's that creeping barrage. Okay, boom, 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 boom. And then you would have watched that come down the hill. If you would have been able to see through it, you would have actually seen American troops behind that artillery barrage. And they figured out at this time, up until here, we had the 1st Division, the 2nd Division, the 42nd, the 26th on the other flank. They knew that you had to stay close to that artillery barrage. If you wanted to survive, you had to be close to where the artillery was landing. And that meant about 100 meters behind it. Because as soon as the artillery then advanced another 100 meters to 300 meters, you had to run up and keep up behind it so that when the Germans came out of the defensive positions, they ran into you first. Okay? So you would have watched the artillery come down that hill, boom, boom, boom. Behind it, you would have seen the Americans coming across that hill. That was the 89th Division you were watching coming across that hill down there. You would have watched it come down into the valley behind us. And that valley behind us, in that wooded area back there, that's the town of Bouillonville. Bouillonville was the day one objective for the 89th Division. You would have watched that artillery come down to that point, and then on this grassy area where the trees are back here, on the other side of this field, the artillery stopped there. Because what they did was they advanced with artillery, and then they kept the artillery hitting one area. They used it as a defensive perimeter to allow all the troops to catch up and to get all the supplies behind you so that they're waiting for the German counterattack. So you would have saw the artillery just keep hitting the ground, boom, 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 and nobody would have wanted to go through it. Shortly after that, about 1 o'clock, the thing you would have really noticed is this, is that artillery started coming this way. Because what happened was they reached their day one objectives so fast that the commanders for the different divisions called back to Pershing and said, hey, can we go to day two? Pershing said, go for day two. And that's when their artillery started moving this way, boom, 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 and started coming across this field. We see right here that artillery barrage was moving this way. If you would have still been standing here, you would have watched it move up, and immediately behind it, you would have saw troops from the 89th Division right behind it, assaulting. After about 3 o'clock, if you were still alive, the artillery would have been past this point, and you would have either been a dead, soldier, or you would have been a POW by the 89th Division. The 89th Division then went through this area where the cemetery is at, and where the road is behind us, where your bus is parked, that became the front lines for the September 12th night. Except morning of the 13th, they continued moving that direction. By the 14th, they were in the woods in the far distance. That's what actually happened in this point, with this area right here. So the 89th liberated this area. You would have been able to look down and watch actually the back part of the 2nd Division moving through Thiaucourt. Thiaucourt was the very first village, town, that was liberated by American troops in World War I. They liberated that solely by themselves. We liberated this solely by ourselves. Also, in this whole battle, there was 550,000 Americans involved in this, 150,000 aviators, and I'm talking, when I say aviators, I'm talking about the mechanics, the crews, everybody taking care of the aircraft. It generally took roughly about 10 guys to put one guy in the air. Okay, and remember, these things were built out of sticks and paper. Okay, there were 150,000 aviators, and then we had about 150,000 French troops. This battlefield was where the coin flipped. Up until this time, our divisions and everybody were under French or British command. When we started this battle from the Saint-Mihiel salient, the Americans were in charge. We had French units and some British units under our command, and from this point forward, the Americans had their own army. This is where the first American army outside the United States was built and put together to achieve an objective. And then basically the command for the first army went to the Meuse-Argonne, and they created the 2nd Army Command Unit here. Okay? That's in a nutshell what happened here.
This in right here. Okay, pull it tight. Okay, who wants to do the fold? Okay. Got a little bit there. Have you ever done this before?
Yeah.
Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to cross over like this. just want to make a V. Pull that tight. You gotta keep it tight while you're pulling. You gotta hold on tight down there. Nice straight line. Okay. That's it. Flip it over. Okay. Like that. Very tight. You help them keep it tight there. Oh, here. That way. Yeah. Okay. When you're doing this, you want to keep it straight. So this will go straight here. Like this. Yeah. Okay. This way. Good job. Looking good. Keep the blue out. Blue out. Good. Do you tuck it?
You want to make some pictures before?
Do you tuck it?
Yes. I will do.
Why does that?
This is the 28th Division, Pennsylvania Division Memorial, paid for by the state of Pennsylvania.
I know what's guys from the action board. November. After World War I, guys had going back. Yeah, guys got over to 28 years. Yeah, 109. They're all coming back. Oh, I know, man.
This is also the town where Marie Antoinette and the king were caught after they fled Paris. And they were caught right down the street there at the church with the clock on it, or the building with the clock on it. And they were taken back to Paris and they were executed soon after.
Good morning, bonjour. Ladies and gentlemen, in order not to disturb the ceremony, please silence your cell phones. Mesdames et messieurs, afin de ne pas...
In this French countryside, in this beautiful American cemetery. Minister Davosek, Madame Ambassador, Secretary Spencer, Mr. Prefet, ladies and gentlemen from the French Parliament and Senate, and the regional and departmental councils, Madame Mayor of Balou, Commandant Neller, and fellow general and flag officers, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the American people and President Trump, good morning and welcome to the Ain Marne American Cemetery Memorial Day and World War I commemoration. The American Battle Monuments Commission was established in 1923 by the United States Congress, and it was established to commemorate, memorialize the service, the achievements, and the sacrifice of U.S. Armed Forces. Today, ABMC commemorates Memorial Day in 26 of our American military cemeteries located in 10 countries across 4 continents. And folks, I am very honored to be here with you at this revered cemetery to pay tribute to the sacrifice these Americans made in the cause of freedom. Such are the men and women who lie here, that they received each for their own memory, praise that will never die, and with it the grandest of all tributes.
At the age of 20, on 29 May 1917. He served in the 102nd Machine Gun Battalion of the 26th Brigade Division. His unit was one of the first to see direct action against the enemy. He wrote often to his friends and family, as most men did. It was but 2 years ago that his family visited this cemetery and shared his story with us. And it is thanks to them that I may share his story with all of you today. As he began his early training stateside, his letters show a bit of excitement and a sense of adventure. However, arriving in France in October 1917, His tone quickly changed as homesickness set in, and he discovered firsthand a France devastated by years of war. Allow me to share some entries from his letters home to family. 4 November 1917. I wish that I could be with you this Christmas, but I guess that it can't be for some time. But never worry, dear Dad. Someday I'll be with you again. War is terrible. I wish that we'd have peace, but I guess that we won't have it for some time. 5 November 1917. How does Pa feel about my being in France? Does he worry much? I hope not. Please tell him and make him believe that this is not a hard life and that we'll never have to fight, for the war will be over this spring. Lord knows whether or not I'll ever return to the USA, but I don't want him to worry before he has to. Moving forward a few months now. 22 February 1918. We go back to the trenches very soon. It isn't all fun by any means, and we have to take things as they come now. This is a great experience, and we'll surely have much to tell you when we get back, and sadly, much we will never share. I only wish that I could see the villages that we've gone by. All of them, all of their beauty has been destroyed. I've taken a $10,000 life insurance since I've been in France. It may come in handy to someone someday. 1 May 1918. Did you read about the first great American clash? It was terrible, and I was there. It happened on April 20th. I only wish that it was permissible to tell you about what resulted. It is hard when you can't write what you would like to write. You folks at home do not know what war is. Thank the Lord that you do not. I hope that the war will be over before any more of our family has a chance to come across. I've seen some awful sights. We never know how long we'll last in this game, but only trust in God in getting us through safely. 22 May 1918. Days before the German forces break through the French lines. We expect to move to another place soon, he writes. Our furloughs were canceled, so now I guess we'll have a rest only if the war ends. Gee, but if they only declare peace, we'd all be glad. My birthday will soon come, and I hope that I'll never spend another one here. 5 June 1918. The day before the 4th Marine Brigade leads 2nd Division into Belleau Wood for their 20-day battle, clearing out German units. Ludger writes, we can't be as comfy as we were in God's country. Today is my birthday, and I only wish that I were home today and could go fishing. But cheer up, the war can't last forever. 18 July 1918. If we remember back when the Allies began the Aisne-Marne offensive, Ludger writes home, we will be on the front line soon. No doubt that you know about this front. It's in all of the papers. We sleep in the woods, on the ground. We are mighty glad to get rest whenever we can. What a hard life this has become lately. I will not be able to ride often now, as there is too much activity going on. Don't worry now, and cheer up, for everything will turn out okay. Not but 2 weeks after his 22nd birthday, this was his last letter. This was the last letter he wrote as his unit went on the attack through the fields that surround this very cemetery. He was killed on the 20th of July, 1918, and his final resting place is Plot A, Row 8, Grave 23. Thank you very much.
Edward B. Cole was born on September 23, 1879 in Boston, Massachusetts. In 1902, he graduated from Harvard University, and after working for a mining company for several years, he accepted a commission as a second lieutenant in the United States Marine Corps in May of 1904. By 1916, he was working with Headquarters Marine Corps in developing tables of organization for machine gun companies and serving as the War Department's Machine Gun Board in Washington, D.C. He became one of the United States' leading experts on machine guns, inventing a tripod, redesigning a machine gun cart, and notably publishing a field book for machine gunners, about which he is quoted as saying, someday my two fine boys will be able to read this little book and apply it. Perhaps by that time, the machine gun will be as obsolete as the Queen Anne musket today, or better still, war itself may be obsolete. Until that millennium arrives, I want my boys to keep themselves in a condition to answer their country's call, and I hope that they will never wait to be drafted. And they must remember that a good soldier must keep a clean mind and a clean body. He was promoted to major in May of 1917, and later that year was ordered to Quantico to form a machine gun battalion that was to be sent to the war in France. On June 10, 1918, during the Battle for Belleau Wood, Major Cole moved forward with 1st Battalion 6 Marines, crossing open ground towards machine guns. The Marines had nearly reached the guns when they were spotted. However, the Germans were unable to turn their guns around, so they began hurling grenades at the Marines. 2 of them wounded Major Cole in his arms and legs before he grabbed the 3rd to throw it back, and it exploded in his raised hand, shattering it, and the fragments went into his face and all through his body, mortally wounding him. He died from his wounds on June 18, 1918, and Major Cole's final resting place is here at Ain Marne American Cemetery. For his heroism at the Battle of Belleau Wood, Major Cole was awarded the Navy Cross, Distinguished Service Cross, Francis Legion d'Honneur, and Croix de Guerre.
Read those who reached the sky. The sky they probably contemplated, one hand on their weapon or on their hearts. These heroes fought 100 years ago, and yet the echo of explosions can still be heard in some streets, just like 100 cries of suffering can be heard in this cemetery. Brothers, fathers, mothers, sisters, all are gone, but they are still there so that peace can be preserved. This centenary must be the first of 100 others, for even if they are buried under our feet, they will remain in our heads and our hearts.
The tragedy of war, of every war, becomes personal. Military cemeteries and memorials are places of grief, but they also teach us a lesson. The fallen remind us, the following generations, of our responsibilities for peace and for the healing of wounds over their graves. Immanuel Kant reminded us that those who live in the memories of their loved ones are only far away, and that only those are dead who are forgotten. This is why we're here. Today is a day to remember and a day not to forget. The horror of war and violence, of human suffering and loss, is immeasurable on every side. Today we are assembled at one of the countless tombs of the victims. Belleau Wood is one of the many places that stands for bravery, gallantry, heroism, cruelty, and for those who perished. We know that the battle started on June the 1st and ended on June the 26th, 1918, when the forest finally fell to the US Marines. Young, brave, but often unexperienced cowboys, mainly US Marines, attacked against war-weary but experienced and well-prepared German troops. The fight that followed was tough, aggressive, and intensive, and only too often it was fought at close quarters. After more than 3 weeks, the American losses amounted to about 1,800. The US Marines got called the Devil Dogs after Belleau Wood. That alone gives us an idea of the character of the fight. We still don't know the German losses, but 1,600 prisoners were taken, a very high price for a small piece of land. Today, 100 years after those bloody days and the turn of war, the fallen are no longer representing a uniform, a religion, a nationality, an origin. Many of the fallen Americans were emigrants or sons of emigrants of France, Britain, and Germany. Today and to us, they are victims that we have come to remember. History teaches us a lesson. We need to stand together today, side by side, to deal with the challenges of our days. Friendship and partnership are the carrying pillars of Europe and our transatlantic alliance. That goes for matters of state, but also for our very personal relation and contacts on a daily basis. It is therefore an honor for me to stand here today and to speak to you. Ladies and gentlemen, the First World War is rightfully called the great catastrophe of the 20th century. Millions fell victim to it, soldiers and citizens, and the inability of the survivors to find a lasting peace led to an even greater disaster. The graves of those who rest around us here today must therefore not only remind us of the horrors of war, but call for us to do everything in our power to avoid more war and violence in future. We bow our heads to all our fallen. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you. Meinen deutschen Kameraden, herzlichen Dank für die Verbundenheit mit unseren Freunden und alliierten Kameraden. Wir gedenken unserer gefallenen Großväter und Kameraden.
Years since this countryside saw war firsthand, with machine gun fire, artillery, mortar rounds exploding, the use of chemical weapons, the many wounded and the dead. It's been 100 years since the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marine Battalion commanding officer said in his report to higher headquarters, Bella Wood, now U.S. Marine Corps entirely. Today we are performing our duty to uphold the legacy of those that we honor here today, their tenacity and their fighting spirit of those who came before. Few places on this earth mean as much to U.S. Marines, and few battles bond Marines even today so tightly to our history as Bella Wood. As you look over the beautiful countryside today, it's hard to imagine the death, the destruction, the violence that occurred in a 20-day period over a century ago. More than 2,000 Marines and U.S. soldiers lie here, along with French and German, who gave their lives on these grounds. To our French allies, before the United States was ever formed, you were the first to come to our aid in our fight for independence. Since then, our nations have shared a long and storied history as allies. And today, U.S. Marines are committed to strengthening those bonds today. To the local communities that help keep the history of this battle alive and welcome us and host us here every year, my most sincere thanks. To our German allies today, more than a century ago, the battle lines were drawn, sides were taken. You on one side, the United States, England, and France on the other. But today, in our formation, we see how things have changed. U.S. Marines, French Army, German Army, standing side by side. Once foes, we have all embraced the common values of democracy, rule of law, and freedom. So we stand not just together today to commemorate a battle that took place 100 years ago, but we stand as allies where tomorrow in conflicts against common enemies, those who would reject all that we hold sacred and are willing to die for. To the U.S. forces here today, Marines, Army, Navy, Air Force, when you go back to your unit, tell your peers, your friends, your commanders, your NCOs, what you learned about this battle. Tell them about the discipline, the spirit, the skill, the fitness of those who fought here, and the undying spirit to never be defeated, because that's what it takes to be victorious on any battlefield. And use that knowledge to prepare yourself for the next fight. When we choose to serve, for whoever nation we serve, we sign a blank check to that country. The gravestones here are markers of those who paid that price in full. They did their duty. And they expect us to do ours when it's our turn, to ensure that their sacrifice is never forgotten. So may we all take courage from the example of those who fought for this ground a century ago, the courage that compels us to stand up for what is right and to fight for each other. And may we remain lasting allies. And as the U.S. Marines, we remain Semper Fidelis. God bless.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for rifle volleys, taps, and the three national anthems. Mesdames et messieurs, veuillez vous lever pour les sabres d'honneur, les sonneries morts et les trois hymnes nationaux.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a moment of silence. Mesdames et messieurs. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing for the departure of the troops. Mesdames et messieurs, veuillez rester debout pour le départ des troupes. Ladies and gentlemen.
I know where you live.
March of the 8th. Yeah, right.
What?